Hello everyone, it's been a while. In my previous video on the Rhodesian military, I laid down the impression that the Rhodesian security forces were one of, if not the most effective counterinsurgency forces in the world. Now, I'm gonna go and shit on that thesis. If you haven't already watched my video on the Rhodesian military, good. In all honesty, it wasn't that great, and if you have any interest in the conflict, you'd already know everything I said in that video, but I will recount the key points. In the 19th century, Britain was building her empire. Diamond-rich South Africa had become a focus of the British government. Enter Cecil Rhodes. With permission from the government, he moved into South Africa and set up shop, becoming a diamond and railway tycoon. Rhodes moved further into areas called Matabeleland. Post-production, it's called Matabeleland and Mashonaland to expand his Cape to Cairo railway project, which he christened Rhodesia, a very original name. During the late 1800s and early 1900s, the British South Africa Company, or BSAC, which is an extremely evil-sounding name, overseeing the territory, saw mass white migration from Britain and South Africa. In the 1920s, it became a self-governing colony under white rule. After World War II, the British government essentially goes to all the white minority governments of its colonies and dominions and imposes a policy called NIBMAR, or No Independence Before Majority Rule. In both South Africa and Rhodesia, the white governments say no. Tensions rise. In 1965, Prime Minister Ian Smith and the Rhodesian Front lead UDI, Unilateral Declaration of Independence. Rhodesia is now a rogue state. Enter ZAPU and ZANU, led by Joshua Nkomo and Robert Mugabe. They declare war on Rhodesia. The Bush War is on. Now, since the end of the conflict, and especially in the 21st century, the Rhodesian military has taken on an almost godlike appearance. The loss of the war was never the fault of the Rhodesians themselves, they say. Rhodesia lost because of exterior reasons beyond their control. We'll return to that, don't worry. I'm going to say something extremely controversial now. The Rhodesians weren't very good at fighting war. The Rhodesian military was never called the Rhodesian military, nor was it called the Rhodesian Armed Forces. It was called the Rhodesian Security Forces. In the eyes of the government, the main objective of the security forces was just that, security. By 1979, the RSF had 10,800 regular soldiers and 15,900 reservists, a grand total of 25,800 personnel. The Rhodesian police services, including the British South Africa Police, INTAF, the Internal Task Force, and the CIO, essentially the equivalent to the CIA, had 8,000 active police members and an astounding 19,000 reservists, a total of 27,000 members. The police had 1,200 more members than the army. Don't get me wrong, it's normal that countries usually have more police officers than soldiers. However, these police officers were being used as soldiers, excluding regional traditional police. Organizations like BSAP, INTAF, and the CIO often acted as soldiers would. When a quote-unquote crime was committed against, for example, a farm, the BSAP would respond and would seek to arrest these insurgents, often referred to as petty criminals and gangsters by government rhetoric and after-action reports. If they were captured, instead of being interned in prisoner of war camps and being tried at military tribunals for potential war crimes, more often than not, they had their pictures taken, were fingerprinted, and were often tried in public criminal courts as common criminals. Now, was this a war or a police operation? Ian Smith clearly thought the latter. Smith himself, a Spitfire pilot in the war who had been shot down in Italy, had more experience with the ideas of a criminal bandit of insurgents in the early Italian campaign compared to a professional guerrilla organization. Even with the ZANU force, which was trained by the Soviets and thus had a more conventional approach to fighting the war, even with insurgents rolling in from Zambia, Mozambique, and Botswana, the Smith government for the majority of the war maintained the position that they were fighting unorganized mobsters. It is true that communist insurgents were by large ineffective at fighting battles. They weren't, however, ineffective at fighting a war. The misrepresented effectiveness of ZANU and ZAPU insurgents is a story for another time. How bad could they really be at fighting a guerrilla campaign? They got what they wanted, after all. Only in the last few years of the conflict, where things ramped up, notably Rhodesian cross-border raids and communist mass attacks on civilian and military infrastructure, it was too late. It was an incredible misjudgment, and one that lost the war. People will rightly ask, but why, even when the Rhodesians were so effective in military operations such as fire force and cross-border raids, sometimes sporting kill ratios upwards of 1,000 to 0 in operations such as Dingo and Elan, why did the Rhodesians fail? During the entire war, they never lost a single military engagement, so why did they fail? The Rhodesians failed because, while the military may have been effective at their low-scale tactical operations, they blundered terribly in their large-scale strategic vision. Only in 1978, Ian Smith told the world he would give in to majority rule within 2 years. He did this only when he saw it was impossible for his security forces to secure a victory against the communists. There is a myth among supporters of the Rhodesian ideology that the Rhodesian government and military was betrayed by the West. They were betrayed by the British, who forgot their old colony. They were betrayed by the Portuguese, who abandoned Mozambique to the communists. They were betrayed by the Americans, who refused to trade with them. They were betrayed by the South Africans, who failed to support Rhodesia enough. You cannot be of the opinion, which so many are, that it was small plucky Rhodesia up against the world, as well as being of the opinion that the Rhodesians collapsed because of the betrayal of the world. In reality, these quote-unquote betrayals were because of strategic failures on the level of the government. The war was as much a political one as it was a military one. The entire reason the war started was because the Rhodesian Front refused majority rule. They refused to give black people the means to vote for black policymakers. It's ironic that while some people say operations such as Fire Force were some of the most advanced military tactics of the time, they were being used to preserve an idea of the past. Dropping bombs may win wars, but digging your heels into the dirt and praying to keep a long-dead idea alive loses them.